Friends, we invite you to listen to a contemporary word. This morning it's going to take the shape of 4 quotes from 4 different authors. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. From Maya Angelou. From Kristen Noel, sharing our truths can provide the opportunity for great healing. From Brené Brown, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do. And from Andrea Gibson, sometimes the most healing thing to do is remind ourselves over and over and over, other people feel this too.
An ancient word. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying loudly, "Have mercy upon us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done." And their eyes were opened. Then Jesus sternly ordered them, "See that no one knows this." But they went away and spread the news about him throughout that district. After they had gone away, a demoniac who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the one who had been mute spoke. And the crowds were amazed and said, "Never has anything like this been seen in Israel." This is part of our Christian story. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. How many of you have experienced a worrisome thought or felt upset over something or someone, especially during the past year? I have almost 100 years of combined personal, academic, and professional experience with mental health and mental illness. Yet I still experience moments of worry and passing upsets. When Reverend Bob invited me to speak to you today about our mental well-being during the pandemic, I said yes without a moment's thought, because I know mental health. Not long afterwards, the thinking started. What do I say? Will what I say be interesting, relevant, or even helpful? Will what I say be good enough? And the worry started, and I began to notice feelings of anxiety, because I also know mental illness. I was becoming a victim of my own thinking. Why is it that with no thought I trust my actions? Yet with a single thought I can begin to doubt these very same actions. To help us answer these questions, let's begin by reflecting on the lemon. If you feel comfortable, begin by closing your eyes as you listen to my words. Think of holding a lemon in your hand. Feel the pebbly, waxy texture of its skin and see how bright yellow it is. Bring it closer to your nose and smell the sharp aroma. Now picture yourself slicing it open with a knife and seeing the juice squirt. The tart smell rises into the air. Bring a slice to your mouth and suck on it. The juice runs over your tongue. It's so sour your mouth puckers and your eyelids flutter. Now open your eyes. What happened? Did your mouth start to water as you did this exercise? Maybe your eyes even watered a little, or the inside of your nose tingled, and all just by thinking. What you just experienced was the interplay between your thoughts, your emotions, your body reactions, and your behaviors. Each of these elements is part of our mental health, and taking care of each of these elements is important in maintaining mental well-being. When even one of these elements is not well, it can affect your mental well-being. Most of us are aware of our behaviors and how our physical body is feeling, and perhaps some awareness of our emotions. But how aware are we of our thoughts, the never-ending conversation you are having with yourself right now, and the profound effect this internal conversation can have on our well-being? Remember how quickly I was becoming a victim of my own thinking. Another example of what has been called stinkin' thinkin' is the issue of someone else's behavior making us angry. This is a very common way of expressing something, and we hear it often. But in fact, it distorts the situation it attempts to describe. A more accurate description of someone making me angry is to say that I feel angry about their behavior. They are not making me anything. They are simply behaving in a way that I am getting angry about. I notice their behavior, then I become angry. The responsibility for the anger is mine, not theirs. It has been suggested that it is generally irrational and self-defeating to get all worked up about someone else's behavior. The anger is based on a faulty assumption, which is that the other person should behave in the way I want them to. If you think about it, what the other person should do is not necessarily what they do. This is a very important element of the equation, reality. They do what they do, and I automatically get angry about it and feel quite upset for a while. Possibly very upset. It's like walking around with a big push button on our forehead that says, push here to aggravate. Is this a useful response to others' behaviors? Probably not. Since they are very likely going to do whatever it is anyway, it seems then it would make life a great deal easier if I didn't get angry about it and lose my peace of mind. This is when a new tool or two can help us shift our way of thinking and help us feel better. One of the ways to help us become more aware of our thoughts is to pause long enough to acknowledge how we are actually feeling. Take a moment right now and think of a word to describe how you are feeling emotionally. High or low, happy or sad, success or failure, good or bad. It is important to acknowledge the feeling without judgment. It is equally important to accept how you are feeling. It is neither right nor wrong, it simply is. The challenge is to surrender how you are feeling. Offer no resistance, even if it's painful. The even greater challenge in a world that rushes to fix or to numb is to pause and reflect. When we sense a feeling, we can begin to find the thought. Let's go back to my opening story and use the ABCs in a new way to explore how changing our thoughts can help or hinder our mental health. A refers to an activating event. The activating event in my story was the invitation to speak to you today. We'll come back to the B in a moment. C is the consequence of what we typically blame on the event. The consequences in my story were worry and anxious feelings. What most of us are not aware of is that there is a belief in between the activating event, the A, and the consequence, the C. And it is the belief that predicts the consequences, not the activating event. B is what we believe, the story, about a particular situation or about a particular person. In my story, the belief I had was that whatever I had to say to you today would not be good enough. And with this story came worry and feelings of anxiety. If I want to be free of anxious feelings, I need to change my story. Let's try the ABCs a second time with a different belief or story. The activating event remains the same. I am invited here to speak to you today. Again, I'll come back to the belief. The consequence I want to create is one of peace of mind. To achieve peace, I know I need to change my story. So now I'm going to use a D to disrupt the irrational belief that what I have to say will not be good enough. Just because I think this thought does not make it true. And I use E to replace it with an effective and rational belief that whatever I say today will be good enough. And this new belief brings me peace of mind. It was not the activating event that created worry and feelings of anxiety. It was my belief around the event that created the consequence. I am responsible for the consequences of my beliefs or my story, not someone or something else. The ABCs are used to analyze the situation and change our thinking without trying to change the external reality, so we can feel better about the situation. This doesn't mean that we never try to change external reality. Sometimes it is appropriate. It's when it isn't appropriate or an effective response that we can choose to have a different response instead in order to feel better. I asked at the beginning if any of you have experienced a worrisome thought or felt upset in the past year. I am imagining most of you said yes, and this would be a very normal response to a very abnormal situation. However, if after almost a year into the pandemic, we are still worried and upset, remember, feelings reflect thoughts. No judgment, but we can use the ABCs to feel better. First, we need to pause long enough to be aware how we are feeling. The C around the events connected to the pandemic, that's what we're considering. And we can begin by writing a new story about these events. Changing our story will change our experience. The pandemic does not change. Our story changes, and each of us are the authors of our own story. In all honesty, during the first weeks of the pandemic, I was in crisis, chaos, and shock. I gave no time to my thoughts. As time passed, I slowed down enough to become more aware of my feelings in response to the pileup of losses and endless changes triggered by the pandemic. In those first few weeks, I was upset most of the time. Reflecting back, I realized my thoughts sounded like, This should not be happening to me, to my friends, to my family, to my community, to my country. Over time, I began to dispute the irrational belief that somehow my personal bubble should not be affected by a worldwide pandemic, and replaced it with a more rational belief that because I am part of this world, of course I am going to be affected by the pandemic. Now, as the months pass, I continue to add new chapters to my story in response to the pandemic. That includes the belief that the losses have created space for me to do what we are talking about today, making 360 well-being a priority in my life. And whenever I find myself in a state of worry in response to the ever-changing world situation around me, I use the ABCs to add another chapter to my story to keep peace within. The ABCs are a tool, and like all tools, we need to pick them up and use them to become proficient. I'm sure you can think of some activating situations, irrational beliefs, and consequences of your own. It might be helpful to remember it is often easier to start with the C, the consequences of A and B, and work backwards to see what began. Whenever you feel upset, it can be useful exercise to see if an ABC can be done for the situation you're thinking about. You never know, you just might feel better. Get into the habit of doing this regularly, and you might feel a lot better overall. I know each of you will continue to cope and adapt to whatever shows up. And feeling better is possible by writing a new story around the pandemic and for every event and person in our lives. In closing, and in the spirit of Lent, I will share with you that I'm letting go of worry and control, and I am in development with trust and creation. Thank you.